American workers are being squeezed harder than ever before. Productivity is climbing, but wages have remained stagnant for over 40 years. Because of this, the working class has to rely more and more on credit cards, payday loans, and other financial tools created by the 1% to suck away all of our money. Joining me now to talk about how this system became so rigged is Howard Nations. So Howard, Americans weren't always in the situation that we're in right now where workers struggled and struggled and struggled, and there was no such thing really as the top 1%. How did we get here?
You know, it's absolutely amazing when you look at the conditions today. You're in middle class decline while the super rich have an explosion. Today we have wage stagnation, even though we have productivity increasing, and even though productivity is increasing, we still have high unemployment. So Americans are working harder and earning less. At the same time, the passive income crowd, you have the corporate profits are record highs, stock markets are record highs, and the result is, as you say, 1% of the upper wealth in the country owns 50% of the assets. 10% of the wealthy in the country own 85% of the assets at the same time that the wage and middle class are declining. The reason is because American policymakers work almost exclusively to benefit the rich. The rich demand from state and federal legislators and get policies that encourage asset growth and lower their tax burden and diminish the middle and lower class.
And that's not hyperbole either. I mean, we've had a lot of studies come out recently that analyze, the bills, the policies that come out of Washington, that come out of state governments. They show these benefit the wealthy and they hurt the working class. I mean, that's about as black and white as you can get about that issue.
Well, it's the operative word is lobbyist.
Yeah.
The poor and the middle class have very few lobbyists operating on their behalf in Washington and in state legislatures, and lobbyists are extremely effective.
They are. And so, if we go back even further, obviously we know where we're at now, but, really things started to change, I guess, around the late 1970s, early 1980s when Ronald Reagan came in and said, guess what? No more labor unions, no more regulations. Let's all go crazy. Tell us what happened during those years to put us where we are now. Sure.
Historically, in the 1970s, we had runaway inflation. You remember the Carter years. Then we had the threat of globalization, and we had the fear of workplace mechanization. People were going to lose jobs to machines. In the 1980s, we had fear of oil shortages, which was a very big deal, and inflationary spirals, resulting in outsourcing of jobs. Machines and computers started replacing workers, but at the same time, government foreign policy was focusing almost exclusively on access to oil. Domestic policy was all concerned about quashing inflation. But at the same time, there was something going on behind the scenes, which is a very big factor today, which was disguising the fact that wages of the middle class were stagnating in the 70s and 80s. And a very big political choice had to be made, a philosophical choice of the way to move the country. You could either move to the left and do that by providing protection of the workers, protection of the labor unions, and redistribution of wealth, or they could make a hard move to the right, which would mean you enhance the asset-based economy and diminish the wage-based economy. And this began literally, the first thing we can find on it is Reagan, not surprisingly, in a 1975 speech said, roughly 94% of the people in capitalist America make a living through wage or salary. Only 6% are true capitalists who derive their income from ownership of a means of production. We can win this argument once and for all by making more of our people capitalists. So he set about to make more people capitalists, in other words, to make us an asset-based country as opposed to a wage-based country. This was a very easy argument in the face of communism.
It was. I mean, communism played a huge role in all of this because they said, look, as you pointed out, you can move to the left or you can move to the right. And they painted the picture as if you move to the left, we're entering commie territory. Right. You know, we can't be like them. Those are the enemies. Those are the bad guys. We have to move further to the right. And so the American public, again, just like every policy basically has been sold to them, is based on fear. Everything during the Bush years was based on fear, and it goes back to this. We were afraid of inflation. We were afraid of gas shortages. We were afraid of losing our jobs to machines. And so they said, look, we can do this. It's going to solve all our problems. Everything is great. And as we can see, obviously, everything turned out not so great for us.
Well, Reagan set the standard, which is still being followed today very, very prolifically in the Republican Party, the standard by breaking the unions. You remember the big fight with the air traffic controllers. Reagan broke the air traffic controllers union and set a model for that. That was the exemplar. The unions protect the middle class, and the war continues today. The second thing they did was to the middle class investment. They got the middle class to invest in real estate and stocks, and they used their political levers to inflate values. And by doing that, by making it appear that the middle class still had wealth by the value of their homes and by the fact that they were in the stock market, they didn't pay so much attention to the fact that their wages were actually stagnating. The third thing they did was lower the cost of domestic goods through outsourcing. Again, if your goods cost less, it diminishes or disguises the effects of diminishing wages. And so then the methodology by which they implemented all this, the middle class was taken out of defined benefit pension funds and put into 401ks and stocks. And that gave them the feeling that they had a big interest in the stock market. In the meantime, that made the financial sector grow, which is the source of the 1% passive incomes.
Before they had gotten to this place, the 60s and very early 70s, and throughout all time before that, debt wasn't an option for the average American. They would buy a home, obviously, and they would have the debt of their home, but we didn't have, 5 or 6 credit cards apiece. We didn't have student loan debt. If you weren't from a family that could pay for your college, or if you didn't, work your way to pay those bills, you didn't go. We didn't have all these options of banks saying like, well, here, I'll give you money for this. Oh, you need to make some improvements on your home. Let me give you some money for this. You're going to pay me back 15%, but don't worry. We can give you money. And today we just take that as a way of life, but this is a relatively new phenomenon, isn't it?
It is, and the debt is definitely a way of life now, but it came about, as you said, in the 70s, and it started in the 70s and 80s. And debt, again, the credit card debt was another means of disguising stagnating wages. If you could put it on a credit card, you could still buy it. So you didn't recognize the fact that, but for this credit card, I wouldn't be able to afford this. I'll tell you something else that used to be unheard of was the use of bankruptcy as a corporate tool. You remember the Continental bankruptcy during the Reagan years? That was a corporate technique of business. It used to be shameful to go into bankruptcy. Now we see how that's been used again very effectively as a corporate tool to deny, and they use the bankruptcy to break union contracts. They broke the Continental Airlines union contract with both of the unions they were dealing with, and that's still being done today. So all of this is a very carefully devised and carefully designed system that to keep the middle class from realizing that the money you have is diminishing. The actual cash that you have is diminishing. So they feel like if they've got money in the stock market, or they've got, well, I don't have the same income I had, but I have a lot of wealth in my home. I have a lot of wealth in the stock market. My 401k is wonderful. Bush even tried to get people to put their Social Security into the stock market. Can you imagine what a catastrophe that would have been?
Right.
But the whole idea was, and it worked, because it created a more capitalist society. It successfully hid the decline of the middle class, and it mitigated public discontent over wages stagnation.
And one of the biggest, I guess, scams throughout this whole movement was the fact that, when you had Bill Clinton come in and implement NAFTA, this was sold to the public as, look, this is going to reduce the cost of goods. You're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to spend less money because we can get these cheaper goods. But what they didn't tell people, what corporate America knew, what Bill Clinton knew, what the Republicans in Congress knew, was that this is going to benefit the top 1% and it's going to kill jobs here in America. And that's exactly what's happened. It happened with NAFTA. It happened with CAFTA. It's going to happen with TPP, because no matter what anybody says, based on the current makeup in Washington, D.C., I have no doubt that TPP is going to happen. And we've already got trade agreements coming on after TPP. TAFTA is another one. And they're going to keep coming. You know, the top 1%, they're not going to lose their power in Washington because nothing ever really changes. You know, we get an Elizabeth Warren, we get a Bernie Sanders, but, you know, one person, two people against all this money, I don't like those odds.
No, the other people who knew that the NAFTA and all these trade agreements would be very bad for the middle class in America were the labor unions. They fought hard against it. They begged, pleaded, and cajoled Bill Clinton, all to no avail, about NAFTA and about other trade agreements, and it still happened anyway. So the result of all the methodologies that they've used all these years has been that you've got an accrual of wealth at the top, you've got assets inflated, wages declined, and the problem with an asset-based economy is, first of all, it's bubble prone, and secondly, there are boom-bust cycles. So when you get people into the middle class into the housing market, you get the middle class into the stock market. Wall Street can make money off the stock market whether it's declining or going up. The hedge fund people, they control their own destinies. But when you get the average American into their 401k in the stock markets and the stock market crashes, or you have the Great Recession that we had, their savings plummet. So the wage stagnation finally is being recognized. Housing prices are skyrocketing. Household debt is at a record high. And today, half of Americans have no savings. They live paycheck to paycheck. So this is the result of all this that started with, you can go back to Reagan's speech calling for it in 1975. Well, congratulations, you got it.
And this is exactly what the top 1% has always wanted. Howard Nations, thank you so much for telling us the story today.
My pleasure, friend.